morning. I'm Anna Calori Holcomb and a fellow of NCECA. It is a distinct pleasure to introduce this panel, Another China. I have been fortunate to travel around China with these amazing artists, to visit and to work alongside them at these bone china factories. You are in for a treat. The moderator, Paul Mathieu, is an internationally renowned artist teaching at Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver, Canada. A frequent presenter at NCECA, his thoughtful writing can be found in numerous international journals and his book, Sex Pots, Eroticism in Ceramics. Janet DeBoos, who's out on the far right from me, retired as head of ceramics workshop at the Australia National University in Canberra. She exhibits and gives workshops internationally and can frequently be found working in China. She, too, has published books and is an expert on ceramic art practice, education, and glaze technology. Yanze Jiang bridges the worlds of academia in Nanjing University of the Arts and factory design at Goshan. Her work was included in the pivotal curated exhibition at the Henan Museum, curated by Wendy Gers. Please help me to welcome the panel members.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Paul Mathieu, and it's a pleasure today to share with you the amazing experience we had in various bone china factories in China. The title of the talk is Another China, because most of you are probably familiar with all the residencies that exist in China where artists from all over the world work and go to Jindejiang and work in porcelain, or go to Fuping near Xi'an and work with glazed earthenware and so on. But what we are doing in China is another China, because we go work in bone china factories, which is in itself quite interesting, quite special. And what we are proposing for you today is basically a journey. It's a narrative, it's a story. Quite an amazing story, full of discoveries and experiences. It will be an experience, as it has been for us, something that happened organically, full of surprises, constantly reassessing what is happening and responding to it, and so on and so forth. So this experience will try to communicate to you by showing you quite a bit of visual material on what we did, where we did it, with whom we did it, and why we did it, and what happened. And hopefully it will be interesting in a variety of ways, including introducing you to this potential to work in a different way than the expectations you may have around China and what is possible there. So I will pass the floor right away to Janet DeBoos, who will introduce you to the larger picture. Then Yanze will talk about her own work and her own personal interactions with factories and how she has brought other people to that process as well. And then I will end with my own, the work I've done there and how it has profoundly transformed how I work and the kind of work I do. And then hopefully there will be some time for discussions among us or questions from the group as well. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Paul. As he said when he introduced, this is really a story. In fact, it's a series of stories, and what happens is that they come together and they intertwine whilst we're in China. The story for me started back in 2001. I'd been invited to a China ceramic industry conference. So this is not a potter's conference, not an artist's conference so much as it is for the ceramic industry, in a city called Zibo in Shandong province. No one knows where Zibo is usually, but it's south of Beijing. It's Shandong province is the one that has a sort of pointy arm that goes out into the South China Sea, with Qingdao, where they make the beer, on the end of it. So important geography. At that meeting, we went on a number of tours of factories and other facilities in the district, because it's a very big ceramics centre, but more industrial and technical than it is particularly for art ceramics. And one of the factories we went to was a bone china factory, which was fascinating for me. I made work at the time which was thrown porcelain, loosely thrown porcelain, white, translucent, and a colleague who's a very important practitioner in the design field in China said, "You should come and work at this factory." And I thought, that's odd, bone china, because for all of you who know the history of porcelain, you'll know that porcelain was exported to Europe, and in Europe there was this great race to see who could discover the secret of porcelain. And whilst it was developed on the continent, in England they didn't, in Britain they didn't, and what was developed there was something that is quintessentially English, which is bone china. And so here was a factory producing prestigious product for the Chinese market in a bone china factory, and that appealed to me enormously. So I went back a couple of years later, and my translator, my assistant, my eyes, my ears in China was Yanze. And so that was how we first met. She was a student of the man, the designer, who had suggested that I take part in a residency at the factory and have some work made. Professor Jiang, he'd been at Tsinghua University when it was the Central Academy of Art and Design in Beijing. He is a very important person in tableware design in China. So, how do we... This is it, right. Right. So this is the principal at the factory, the general manager, Mr. Su, and the head designer, who was a colleague and a close friend of Professor Jiang's, Yan. And Yan and Mr. Su have been continuing players in this story. And this is, of course, Yanze and myself. Yan was constantly getting designs from designers who were not makers, and any of you who will know about highly vitrified porcelain or bone china will know that sending a design of this kind, which was one that came from Switzerland, will not make easily in bone china. It becomes very pyroplastic. The factory was a very clean factory, if a little austere, and still having some of the remnants of more formal times. It was essentially handmade. This was the casting room at the time, and every person casting, and they were mainly women doing the casting, was responsible for several rows of moulds for particular items, and responsible for getting the slip from the bulk store, checking the moulds, replacing them if they were becoming pitted, ordering new moulds from the mould room. So it was not unlike a larger production studio, but they were making very large numbers of pieces. And this is where the work came out and was checked. These are the setters for those of you who don't know about bone china production. The bisque firing is the high temperature firing during which the ware is vitrified. And because it becomes extremely pyroplastic, that is soft with heat, it needs to be totally supported. So it can be supported on these setters because it does not have glaze on it at the time. And so the kilns are packed in bungs of setters. This is the model makers and mould makers table, and as you can see, it's not a great big digitally operated studio. Yan liked to have handsome, tall young men as mould makers. They trained them from the beginning, didn't take students from art schools or colleges. And I asked him, why were the young men so handsome, all so handsome? And he said, tall, handsome young men at trade fairs makes everyone think we're successful. He was an excellent modeler himself, and he did particularly beautiful handles. One of the things that impressed me was the single most successful item, that is the item they'd sold most of in the factory, was a teapot that he had designed, a coffee pot it was called, which was actually used by the slip casters to pour the slip. So you'd arrived when you had your item used by the workers in the factory to pour slip. So I sent this photo over. This was what was going to be made to give advance warning. There was going to be pourers and teapot, a tea set being made. The drawing, the plaster lathe. The first cast, the bone china is very dark. It has a lot of carbonaceous matter in it. This is a small pourer, which remains one of my favourite pieces. The teapots being made and lined up on the shelves. The small pourers. It was not unlike being in a production studio, and I had a production pottery, and so it was very, very easy to kind of intervene in and feel a part of the process. And this is the production team again. And Yanze at the same time was developing her own designs and work. She will talk more about those. And this was the set that was produced. So 9 days from my arrival at the factory, the models were made in plaster, the moulds were made, the work was slip cast, and this was fired. There's something very nice about that immediacy. The work became stiffer. I found during all the processes of model making and, the designing and drawing it, it's not like drawing on a wheel. It's not like throwing. And it became more formalised and stiffer. So you have to let go of, in some respects, this is a story of letting go. Box design, the set was going to be boxed and sold. And I gave some suggestions for what I thought might be nice, and I picked it a kind of white with a bit of red because I was in China and it's good fortune. And did some rough sketches like this. No, that's too Chinese, I was told. So I said, okay, well, this is for the Chinese domestic market. You design the box. I'm from Australia. That's our opera house in Sydney and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It didn't have kangaroos. That's the Southern Cross, our constellation. So it's interesting, this letting go and seeing things from the other side of the fence. All the time, that's been part of the practice. During that time also, I made other teapots, other designs, and used both the stock decals in the factory and also ones that I had drawn myself. The stiffness of the objects, bone china is very thixotropic, that is that it sets up when it's not being moved, and when it's shaken it becomes very, very flabby. And I tried shaking the pieces to see if the flabbiness could make them look softer, and it makes them look softer very suddenly. I was told, because this set was not very successful, that I should think about design, because a plain white set in China would be regarded just as hotel wear. I was a bit astonished at that, but I thought, no, I can understand. I have to think about design. But no, I'm not a designer. A decorator, I mean. I'm never done decoration. So I nervously started using some stock decals, trying to use them in a way that talked about the difficulty of containing the decoration. So I had these ones sort of disappearing in an entropic way. It led to a series called Entropy, but nailed under the cup when it's on the saucer, so it only kind of escapes. You only see where it's coming from when you use the cups. But I decided I'd go back to using a quintessentially Western design. This is an out-of-copyright Dalton design called Summertime Rose. And it, again, is quintessentially English. Because I was finding, here I am in China, but I'm basically of European stock living in Australia. I work with Indigenous communities. And it introduced a sense of, where is home and what are the kind of cultural, if not icons, like the Harbour Bridge or the Opera House, what are the things that designate home? So I started using them, and the more I used them, the more I used them. And I found it was quite addictive. It led to a series, as I said, called Entropy, which was about decoration and how I tried to control it, but it always got away. And these are some of the Summertime Rose tasteful ones as opposed to overdone ones. And then they got more. And then, when I was shopping in the local supermarket, they have those cheap bone china mug racks where you can buy bone china for $4 a mug. And there was Summertime Rose. And I thought, but that's my decal. That's my decoration. I was feeling the ownership at this stage. So I bought some of them, and I thought, now I've got work that's made in a factory, so it's industrially made. These pieces are industrially made, but they would be made in similar sorts of factories probably. Why can't I use them as part of a set? What constitutes a set? So that led rise to another series called Set Theory, asking what constitutes a set, where I included hand-thrown work that had the Summertime Rose decal on it, factory-designed work that I had designed that had Summer Rose decal on it, factory-made work, I should say, and also completely industrially made work that I had found that had the Summertime Rose decal on it. And it culminated in, it was a show at NCECA, I can't remember which one, but some years ago, and this was a big set theory, which is a mixture of all of them. So this was the team. There were also decal designers as well as the model makers, and it became more like a family, like friends, that we visited. And I decided I would design my own decals. Instead of having English roses, I would use Australian flora, but see if I could put them into a format that was not specific. So these are Australian native flowers, stylised. And I used them on porcelain also. I took them to Jingdezhen. They also appeared on decals designed by the factory's designers. That red flower is not a Chinese flower, that's a waratah, which is my home state's state flower. And it led to a kind of a hybrid work, which I'm still working on to a large degree, still working with, where it's a kind of a hybrid between two places that feel like home. I wanted to use images that were culturally specific, but I wanted the decoration to be borderless in a way, not to have clearly defined, this is home, this is away. I also had work made in a porcelain factory in the south of China. Professor Jiang organised a tour of factories. We visited 15 in 5 days. And I was working with a young man I was in a mentorship relationship with in Australia, and Yanze came also, and we were able to have work made there. I had these bottles made, and these were made directly casting from a thrown form, because that was the next stage. What was interesting was that, yes, they were all identical except for the tops, because in the thrown form the top was not level, and that couldn't be cast easily in that way. I mean, it could be, but it was more difficult. So they hand cut the tops. And as soon as the hand was introduced cutting them, they were all slightly different angles. And I found that fascinating, the way so little hand was needed to make it look more handmade. So back to working with Jiang Shoujo and his assistant. Everybody has an assistant in China, Sai. He suggested that we do a collaborative set because my decoration was a bit... And he would do the decoration and I would do the forms, which meant that I had to work on a form that gave him a smooth, flat area for his design. And also he suggested, and this was the first time it had happened in this factory, and I think, would it be the first time thrown models in a factory in China? Yes. Yeah, and I think first time in China to have someone throwing the models in the factory. So brought a wheel into the factory, and I threw, and a lot of the workers had never seen anyone throwing a pot before. So that was really interesting. You know, we assume knowledge across industries and across, you know, cultures within our own clay culture. Even the general manager came down to watch in his suit. And it's pretty hands-on. I mean, that's her Yanze spinning the mould for the first cast. And this is produced in a smaller studio which had been developed for doing short runs of things. It was very, very hands-on decal making. Professor Jiang drew the decal design. We just did photocopies or print out on the printer for them, cut them up, stuck them over the pots. And you can see how there's a big smooth surface there. And in the back you can see Yanze's work. And then it was launched as a limited edition set. It was very successful. I think they all sold more or less on the opening day. We were like film stars. What was interesting, it sold for a lot of money. It sold for about 2.5 times what one of my hand-thrown sets would sell for in Australia, undecorated. And this was decorated, but it was packed in a nice box. And that's the set. Every one of the cups was different. This is something they hadn't done before because I threw 4 cups, so they were all different. The museum where it was launched had this big picture. As I say, we were like film stars. People wanted to take selfies with us. In the meantime, I was continuing to throw teapots. Each time I'd go there, I'd throw them, try out shapes and ideas, the kind of things you might do when you are teaching. And that's happened continuously, doing these. I have no contract saying that they have these designs or not. It's something I do when I go there, and I am looked after, as are my colleagues, each time we go there. I said, you don't want just me in the factory, and Yanze, of course, at this stage, she was getting busier because she was working with another factory as well. We need to have people here. Can I invite friends? They said yes. So we had a symposium where we invited, I got carte blanche to invite who I wanted to work with, a fairly disparate group of people from all over the world. Paul Mathieu, of course, Carol McNichol from the UK, who's doyen of English ceramics. Vipul Srivilasa, he's Australian Thai artist. Yanze, of course. Chris Weaver from New Zealand, who makes the most beautiful tableware, but I feel has been overlooked in world terms. Takeshi Yasuda, who is probably known to most of you. Michelle Lim was a student at the time, a graduate student of mine from Singapore, has since gone on to start her own studio, very successful in Singapore, and me. And so we basically had the factory to play with. We could do as we wanted. And what was interesting was everybody chose different ways to approach working with stuff in the factory. Takeshi and I threw, and neither of us got anything finished during the course of the symposium. But we learnt a lot. Paul had come with a cup design, which he will talk more about. Michelle was there basically to learn and she was helping with translation, but she also did a teapot. That's my student. That's Michelle, Vipul on the left, Chris Weaver. Paul again. And the model making, which took part at the factory, was a father and son team, still a very direct, traditional method of model and mould making. Ilona Romule from Latvia, who was going to talk here, she worked in two ways, one with using the stock decals and working back into them with her own extraordinary on-glaze decoration, porcelain drawing and painting, and also with forms that were drawn very much from the Art Deco embellishments on the buildings in Riga. This is her drawing. Every one of those dots is a single dot of a pen. And the red bits that look a little bit saucy are in fact goldfish. Vippu worked with overglaze. He'd never done overglaze blue and white of this kind before. And he also collected up the turning scraps and crammed them into moulds and made this series of little cups which the fish swam across. I threw a bottle to Carol's specifications, and then she cut and reassembled it and had moulds made of that. What was interesting was everyone responded in different ways, and the factory was very supportive of whatever people wanted to do. This was using stock moulds but cut up and stock decals but cut up and applied in a random way. Chris Weaver's beautiful teapot, tea set. You can't see, but there's a very fine grain from a fine twisted wire for the sides, the cut sides of that. He couldn't find the wood that he normally finds as driftwood on the beach near his house, but he did find a toilet brush. Michelle did a tea set. And then it was all displayed at the end of the symposium at another China ceramic industry meeting, along with the production wares from Huaguang and also their one-off pieces. They make these large pots and then they have artists come and paint them. Carol. Yanze. Yanze's work. We were asked to bring work with us as well, so our usual work plus what we'd done in the factory. This is one of the designers. What happens, though, is technology advances. And in the factory, going from that very hands-on slip casting and production, switched to a more industrial mode. Pressurized slip casting, instead of single spoons being slip cast, there might be 20 to a round of moulds and then a stack of 20 moulds. This becomes much harder to do short runs or intervene in the process. Other machinery being used as well. This is a machine that a friend described as sounding the death knell of hand throwing in factories. It's a roller edge press. But what happened was still they had this very hands-on model making and mould making, and we could still work at that level. There's still a lot of staff doing a lot of hand working. This is us looking at the plans for the new museum and design studio, which we've now moved into. We have a permanent room in the factory, well, I have a permanent room in the factory which I can invite people to. And the factory has started a collection of 100 teapots, and they do the teapots just for this collection. I'm allowed to bring students there. People can come there and bring students just to see and learn, or colleagues who just want to look. And sometimes when you come back, you find odd things like this teapot of Chris's, and instead of the exquisite wire-cut sides, there are kiwis on it, which if you're from New Zealand, you know is what we call New Zealanders. Chris would not like this, and so it was strongly suggested that this go no further than the factory, and it hasn't. There are still shelves of them sitting there. And I came back and I found that teapot I'd thrown a couple of years before suddenly was being made. And so they get turned into teapots and glazed, and they're being added to this 100 teapot collection which is an ongoing thing. It's very much like the relationship we have with the factory. Sometimes I will throw designs. This is her Yanze design, which he asked me to do, so I will do that. It's a factory, contrary to everybody's preconceptions. There are good factories in China that look after their staff. They invite their staff to come and have lunch with them. You know, the management and the staff eat together. The workers all have an hour's sleep after lunch, for which they have stretchers and mattresses and eiderdown, sleeping bags. So you have to creep very quietly and the factory's very dark. Or it's the design studio, really, rather than the factory. And still there is a lot of this handwork going on, the decals being put on by hand. And a lot of fun. And they also indulge us in many of our desires. There have been many people that I've been able to invite since, and I suspect it's a bit of an ongoing story. Paul and I keep saying this must be the end of it. You know, we must have done as much as we want to do. And yet we're back there again. And I think one of the things is, with an unfolding story like this, is it forces you to let go of your expectations. It's not a design exercise in that formal way of, here I have a design and I want it to be exactly like this. It goes through the hands of other people, and other people have input into it, whether they formalise it or whether they make it sloppier. And I think that's one of the things that for me has been so fruitful, because it has forced me to do things like look at decoration and think about decoration. And now I find it very hard to stop. Yes, and so sometimes it's the errors and the failures also that actually lead to new ideas. Last time we were there, Paul and I did some vases, just because we had time to kill. So I threw some, and Paul did squidgy hand-pinched versions. We haven't been back since then, but who knows? They'll be waiting. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Yanze from Nanjing, China. I'm very glad to have opportunity to be here to share with you our experience of developing some designs in Chinese from China factories. In the beginning, I would like to give you a little bit introduction about myself. I had my graduate study in Jingdezhen Ceramic Institute for 3 years. Living and working in this porcelain capital of China, I got used to use porcelain clay to create my own work. I like the characters of porcelain, such as sensitivity, delicacy, and fineness. For a period of time, I use porcelain to make murals, outdoor sculptures, and some abstractive pieces. I graduated in 2000, and then I started my teaching career at Nanjing University, where I teach now. From 2003, I started to make some functional objects, such as teapots and vases. The image on the left side shows the first teapot I made during my residency at Australian National University, where DeBoos was the former head at that time. Inspired by all kinds of different human gestures in Chinese traditional rituals, I often utilize these human figures as subject. But to make function objects is not my final goal. I grouped these pieces together in rows or lines, or gathered them in other groups to assume a different character of these pieces. Also, I assembled these pieces together to make a different structure. While this structure is out of order, and I try to make an order of them. This work all made at a school studio. From 2004, I started to had a residency at Zibo Huaguangbong China factory in Shandong province. This project was initially started by Janet as her personal research project. I came here with her and I was the translator for this project. But from that point on, I started to transform my own studio work to design. One of my teapot was produced in the factory. I preferred to use my own calligraphic brush strokes to make deco for these teapots, while the general designer of the factory thought hand painting is much more valuable than deco decoration. So the painters in the factory painted these teapots. But I'm not happy with the results, so I stopped them to put this teapot to the market. Because these painters who painted this teapot had no training of free calligraphic brush strokes, and their painting lost my original meaning of design. But on the other way, I got a lot of second pieces. Then I used these second pieces to build my individual works. Then from 2010, I started to work with another Bong China factory in Gaochun, which is very close to Nanjing, where I live and work. Gaochun is very different from other Chinese ceramic factory because this is a new factory in China, compared to other ceramic factories located in traditional pottery town. And this factory was built in 1958. It produced earthenware and stoneware for local markets and later for overseas. A new Bong China line was set up in 2007 to meet the market demanding for our national market. On the left side, you can see the ordinary products produced in this factory. You know, in China, yellow is always presumed to be the color of royalty, and the red is a symbol of passion, power, and good luck, and welcome. So yellow and reds are the most popular, produced for these products. But in my view, red is a symbol of revolution. Do we need a revolution for Chinese industrial ceramic design? Maybe we need. So in 2013, I got a grant from Nanjing government and started to set a new design studio inside of this big company. This new design studio was located in a big garden inside of the factory with another 6 studios. This design studio has a very strong link with the product development department in the factory. All the designs produced in this studio follows the general rule of mass production, but on the other side, it is unique and artistic, forward-looking, and open to experiment. Some of my design were put to small production. As a designer, you always want to see your design produced and you're eager to know the market feedback. The image on the right side is a wine teapot in a standing figure. If you want to use it, you need to take the cap off the teapot and put a little lid on the top of the pot. But this wine pot was refused by the general manager of this factory because he thought it was unpolite to use a wine pot without a head on the shoulder if it was a human figure. So anyway, two of my vases in human figure were produced in the factory with my decal of my own calligraphic brush strokes. In 2013, I designed a Peking cloth tea set. I got inspiration from very nice Chinese Qing-style textile bookmark, which I found from a souvenir store in the Royal Palace of Madrid in Spain. So I designed this set to bring this beautiful Chinese elegance beauty from thousands miles away. And the form keeps the natural wrinkle of the bag. A blue series of Peking cloth tea set. In 2014, I finished a design of Ice Age tea set and dinner set. It is a very big series of design. It covers almost every object on the table. In this design, I used the hot wire to cut the higher density of the foam. So this way of making models is very different from other way of making prototype models. These images on the left show the way of using hot wire cutting the foams to make the prototype model. And then the firm prototype model was transformed to plastic models and then make molds from these case models. It spent a lot of time to polish the surface of the plastic models because the wire cutting left a lot of texture on the surface of the plastic models. And also I asked one of my students to use the computer design to make new forms according to the design which we made by hand, because I want to see the difference of design between handmade and computer designed. The package and the catalog was designed by my colleague and his student, as we always want, a whole series of design instead of other people do design for us, but they may not understand our design. In 2014, I invited Margaret Oroka from Britain to develop her lamps in the factory. She developed two series of lamps, a flower lamp and moonlight. The images show some hanging flower lamp and one of the table lamp. Her design of moon lamp was ordered by Wolf Architect Company. Also, Ilona Romule came in 2014. She designed a tea set for Chinese markets. but with her unique artistic style. This tea set was produced in vibration of colors, red and orange, matte gold and matte silver. Horse is the regular elements Ilona liked to use in her studio work. But now she transformed her studio work to the factory production. Also, through this project, some of our students got the opportunities to work in the factory, and this let them get more understanding of factory designs. These were tea set and tableware designed by one of the graduate students. It is not very easy to work in a factory with the factory staffs and the factory workers, as some of them, they didn't understand what you're doing here. So it's not very easy. In 2014, I spent 1 year to make my own work. I used all these abundant and useless honeycomb ceramics produced in a factory to make my own installation work, city and Shanshui. I spent 1 month to finish this big installation. So you see, there are lots of resources we can use in the factory if you can find them. So that's what I want to talk today. Thank you.
I just want to add that Ilona was supposed to be part of the original panel, but she couldn't make it to Portland, so we both Janet and Yanze added a few images of her work to substantiate her absence here, because she's a very integral part of that process, along with quite a few other artists. And now we'll move on to my work in bone china factories. When Janet invited me to go to a bone china factory, I was very surprised at first, because I had no interest in working in a factory, no interest in being a designer of any kind, and no interest in making productions, multiples. Sometimes I wonder whether I should even make one of the kind of work I do. So why make more? At the same time, those of you who know me know that I'm quite contrary, and I like to do the contrary things. And sometimes you have to be contrary to yourself as well, not just to everybody else. So I said, well, that's interesting, bone china, factory, multiples, design. What could I possibly do? And I said, well, I'm going to go to China with you, Janet. Thank you for inviting me. That could be an interesting experience. It seems to be moving on its own, as I was worried it would. Can we stop this from happening, guys, so that I have control? The one thing I like is to control things. So, yes, I had made a design on a piece of paper of a cup based on a styrofoam cup, just a very basic design. But to give it a twist, can we stop this in any way? Sorry. It will get fixed at the back, and I'll just continue talking. So yes, I wanted the cup to be a bit more complex than its basic form, and decided to make it a double-walled object cast in 2 pieces. And then Is it still moving?
It just changed then, yes.
And then we tested it before, and it was totally fine, but now, of course, let me just chat you up while the problem gets fixed. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Thank you. I had first met Janet at a residency at the University of Hawaii in Manoa, where we were invited by Susan Wolf to be part of a summer residency. So when she invited me, I was very thankful. And I had started at the time to work collaboratively by going to Jindajian and working there with the city of Jindajian and making all kinds of things. But, and I had also started to work with digital technology with assistants that I got a grant to hire to do my work, because I'm basically computer illiterate, as you can see. And I resist digital technology. And again, this is this contrariness that I was talking about. You know, like I didn't want to work collaboratively, so I did. I didn't want to work with digital technology because I'm quite averse to them, so I did. And in China, it all sort of came together, because working in a factory, they're figuring it out at the back, is very much collaborative. And it was interesting to introduce digital technology as well as I was doing with my own work at home in Vancouver, in my studio, and so on. So I'm running out of things to say here unless images pop up again and I can resume my narrative. There we are. I see it here. It's going to pop up there very soon. There we go. So we're back at the cup. So I brought the cup to the factory, the design, and we made molds. Like Janet explained, it was quite magical. We were at the factory for 9 days. And in 9 days from drawings, they made a model, they made a mold, they cast it. It was fired, then glazed and refired again, and decals were put on if necessary. And at the end of 9 days, we had an exhibition. And that happened for 8 artists, all at once. So it was quite magical. But as I explained, I wanted the two objects to penetrate one another, so that when you rotated one form, it went into the other and maximized the space available inside. And when this is another view of the piece, when we did it in the factory, those were the first pieces cast at the factory, the mold maker said, your design will not work, because the wall of the interior forms were straight, and it would not, he says, it's not going to penetrate the form by rotation the way you want to do it. And I said, well, I'm not going to argue, but I think he's wrong. I think it can be done. And so we just did it the way he said it would work, which was just to drop it straight in, which made the interior form quite smaller than I intended it to be. So we did it that way. And when I came back home, I said, I have to figure out whether it can be done the way I just showed you with the rotation. And that's done with computer modeling. And it took my student assistant 3 months to figure out the exact curve it needs to be in order for the rotation to take place. Because a number of things happened at the factory. One of them was that I realized that my very basic cup was very interesting when you had multiples, because you could line them up and they would join together in interesting ways. And I also started to decorate them at the factory. And you know me very much as a surface person. You know, I make simple forms with very complex surfaces, so I was very interested in this. So I had brought with me images of flowers in my garden, and with the help of a designer at the factory, we photoshopped all those images as a field. And I had asked Janet before going, Janet, do you think they have a digital decal printer? And she had said, well, I believe they do, because once I was there and they took a picture of me with a group of people, and the next day they gave me a porcelain tile with a full color photograph on it. And the only way they could have done that was by a digital print. So I said to the designer who was working with me, I'm not quite happy with the design, but can we make a test run and can you have it printed so we can see what it looks like? And she says, oh, yes, we can do that. And 2 days later, I said to her, I said, where is my decal? It's a digital print. It can't take that much time. She says, no, it's not a digital print. It's a silkscreen print, and we had to make 16 screens to make the decal. And that was just a test. This is the result of the decal that I made. So just to give you an experience how you need to readjust your preconceived notions on how things are done. And in China, for a factory to make 16 screens to make a test of a decal is not an issue. You know, that's the way they do things all the time. Well, for us, it's almost unthinkable that you'd do such a thing. But anyway, I got very interested in this idea of working in factories. I got the bug, basically. And recently, we have resolved other kinds of surfaces with my assistant. Again, this project started 7, 8 years ago, and it's basically finding its resolution now. With my assistants now, I have them take selfies of each other facing each other with their cell phone, drinking from the cup, and then we make a decal that wraps around the cup, so that when you line them up, the decal unwraps along the lateral cups. Or if you group them in a group of 4, the decal goes around as well. So it's been quite interesting to combine digital technology with the unmade process. Another thing that I discovered was if I took 2 cups and joined them at the lip, it created a very beautiful vase form. So at a further visit, because I've been going to Guangzhou and Gaochun bone china in Nanjing every single year for the last 7 years, because at first it wasn't working the way I wanted. So my assistant in Vancouver designed the digital form. We created plastic print with a digital 3D printer. I bring that model to China, where they are then cast at the factory. They're brought back to Vancouver, where I design very complex digitally printed decal surfaces. This one is based on galaxies, downloaded from the internet and created as a field all over the form. Then this is made with hadron colliders, the atom smasher in Switzerland. So I went on the internet and downloaded those wonderful images of the hadron collider. We cut them into flower shapes. Then the flower shapes are reorganized as a field of flowers that is then printed as a digital print and transfer over. You model it in the virtual world. And I'm still computer illiterate. I still don't know how to do any of that work. I just know what I want to do with it, and my assistant do it for me. So it's very much collaborative in many ways, and they have quite a bit of input in the final product. So it's been tremendously transformative of my practice through work in factory, to work with digital technology, and to make that kind of work, which happens. It's very improvisational in the sense that I never know what the next step will be. I just say, oh, well, I want to make this cup. And then the cup becomes a vase. And then the vase gets all those surfaces. This is people wearing masks as a field of flowers that become in itself a flower as it forms over 3 vases. And on that first trip at Guangzhou in Shandong province, I had also brought the design of a plate with me. And that was a huge mess when we did it at the factory. I wasn't ready to come up with a good design. So over years, again, working with my assistant, we came up with this very specific profile for the plate. And I wanted the plate to have a locking mechanism so that it would stack in a specific location. And this is where the ripple happens at the lip that creates the lock. And then it also has a very high foot at the base, because I wanted them to stack in a specific way and create a cylinder over which I could then put decoration. So this is the first set that was produced with the support of Yanze at Gaochun bone china near Nanjing, where they made the molds and produced them in bone china for me in a very small run. And then at home, I would design decorations that I would put on that foot. And that whole process took about, 7 years, again, from inception, the first idea for the plate, to the work that I'm doing quite recently with this. And for those 7 years, I was asking myself, what kind of images should I put on this stack of plates? I had seen the plate in my mind as a stack from the beginning that created a cylinder, but I could not come up with an idea of what to put on it as an image. But working with my assistant, I decided to put the 4 of them around a table eating Chinese food, taking selfies of each other. And then we photoshopped those images to create a continuous in the round decal that was put on the foot of each plate. Because each plate also has a code for the order in which they are to be stacked. And the code is the Chinese food on the table: 1 dish, 2 dish, 3 dish, 4 dish. So for something like this to happen, it's like 7 years of work by myself, with the factory, with Yanze and Janet, with my assistants. And each step, you don't know what you're going to do. You just progressively develop the idea. At Waguangzibo, when there is times where you don't know, you're waiting for something to happen. So I built a little teapot, quilted teapot of the type of which I had been making for years previously, and eventually it got cast. And every time we go back, we play with decals on them, and so on. And on that first trip, I had also brought a few small pieces. Those I had made in Jindajian previously with the extraordinary expertise of that city. And I had also brought some little salt and pepper shaker set, 20th century disasters that I had made at the time. So here you have the Holocaust on the right, and then Hiroshima and the atomic bomb. One is salt, one is pepper. And at the back you have the Tiananmen Square events in 1989 with the goddess of democracy and the little tank and the little boy in front of the tank. And when at the show, at the trade show, I got it out of my box, I put it on a plinth, and at the back of that piece it says human rights, democracy, freedom of speech in Chinese. And I turned around and I turned back and it was gone. Nobody said anything, nobody mentioned it again. And the next day when the show was over, they gave it back to me. And one of the pleasure of working in China is not only the discovery of all the possibilities and how your works change, but the cultural nature of that, your presence there, and how you learn to navigate another culture, and the political sensibilities of the place, and how you learn to get things done and make friends and really learn the cultural differences between us and them and adapt to it. And it's tremendously exciting, and also the most exciting part is that part for me, more than making things and producing things. I had also brought some tiles I had done in Jindajian based on bathroom gestures that were being produced there at the pottery workshop. And also, during that first residency, I had found on the internet this painting by Taiwanese artists of 100 famous people throughout history. And I said it would be quite fun if we put the pictures of everybody in the symposium within those famous people pieces. So with, again, the help of the designer at the factory, you can see me there on the left, and you can see Janet and Ilona on the right, and everybody who was part of the symposium was fitted into that famous people painting. And eventually a decal was printed and put on one of my vase. And this is quite recently. Again, this is something that took quite a few years to manifest itself, but was quite interesting to do. And what I want to say to finish is that when I was invited by Janet, as I mentioned earlier, I was not interested in China as a factory place, working collaboratively, and so on and so forth. But it has opened a tremendous world of possibilities for my work. It's been very generative of new work. All of this experience has transferred itself in all kinds of unexpected ways in the work I do by myself in my studio. and with my assistants. And it's been a very, very good experience. So thank you, Janet, for inviting me. And I hope some of you will have the joy and pleasure of be given the opportunity of do something like this in the future as well. Thank you. We have 20 minutes. Yes. So, one thing I would like to ask Janet, something she mentioned very briefly during her talk is how, she said to us, I'm not a decorator. And then through working in the factory, you sort of discovered decoration, and it has had a tremendous impact on your work as well. Can you tell us a bit more about that transformations for you from being a non-decorator to become an uber decorator recently?
I think, first of all, one of the things that that governs a lot of my response to possibilities in work is a statement of my mother's, which she would always be saying. She had lots and lots of little maxims and aphorisms that she would trot out. And one of them was, you should always bring the enemy within thine own camp. And of course that's saying you should get to understand what seems like your enemy, because in that process you will find that you don't really have an enemy, you have more in common. And even going to work in the factory and in a design role, it was the enemy at the time of handmade pottery, design and Chinese factory production, and that was the enemy. So that made it attractive for me, as well as that cultural conundrum of bone china being made in China to sell to the domestic market there, and it being a desirable product in the home of porcelain. So I think that the same thing with decoration, being told it was one of those throwaway phrases, you will have to start thinking about decoration, so it was in there, it was like a bullet, and it sits there lodged in your brain, and tentatively trying it. And I think trying new things like that, you do tentatively at first. I do. And gradually it sort of builds up. And one of the things that I found was that, I had always regarded myself as a potter more of form than of surface. I worked with glazes and that was it. But I found that cultural depiction resided a lot on the surface of things. I was also working with an Indigenous community in Australia, and a lot of Indigenous art is, I mean, it's flat, you know, it's where I work. Traditionally, they drew in sand and then would use a stick like a windscreen wiper to wipe away the story and tell the next chapter of it. So it was on a flat surface. And historically, in decorative arts, the surface has always been a place where culture resided, stories about culture, rather than the more timeless aspects of form. And so I think that was what appealed to me about it, was that the possibility of including that. And I wanted to include it all. You know, I get greedy when I have a little bit, and when you've had a little bit, you want a bit more. And so to find a way where you could include that all has been an ongoing interest. And at the moment, I think that I'm going to move towards a position of less decoration, a bit less, and see what happens. I'm leaving more space on work, but I'm still a bit uneasy about that. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm also curious, I'm guessing that many of you would be curious to know more about the design studio that Yanze is developing at Gaochun, and where she has invited some people to go do design work that was produced by the factory. And what are your intentions and future plan for this amazing studio you have put up there?
Sorry, I didn't have a precise plan at the moment. Mm-hmm. In the beginning of thinking have this design studio is because I'm doing my PhD study at our university, and I was focused on the Western industrial design history, especially the British industrial design. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested to know what happened in the Western countries, especially in Britain, because in 17th century, the center of industrial ceramic production was in Britain, in Stock-on-Trent, but it was declined in the middle, or maybe we can say later 20th centuries, and I was very interested to know what happened, mm-hmm. and also I want to know their designs and the design history. So I started my study, and then at the same time, I got an opportunity to apply for a grant from Nanjing government. So I think that would be a very good opportunity for me to understand the principle of industrial ceramic design made in Chinese ceramic factories. Even I had chance to work in Zibo, but that is only one case. So in this case, I can look more deeply to factory design in Chinese factory. So for the last 3 years, I spent a lot of time in the factory and to see how the factory designers developed design for Chinese markets. And at the same time, I did my research too. So it's very interesting for me to look both sides, and one side of the Western design history and one side of the actual what happened in these Chinese factories. Because we know in 19th centuries and the Western ceramic factories got a lot of inspiration from China. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but now the production line moved from Western to the Southeast of Asia, to China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, these countries. So the design in Western countries were also borrowed by these factories in Southeast of Asia countries. So for the purpose, so I just want to I was curious to see the knowledge transformation from east to west, and now from west to east. So I don't know what will happen. So
Yeah.
maybe I will continue. Yeah.
Yes, I understand that the conditions at the factory are very sensitive in terms of, like when we go to the factory, they host us, they put us in hotel, they provide us with food for the duration of our stay. The generosity is tremendous. But when you have visitors and designers like Margaret and Ilona, who
Yes.
have been very successfully producing work there, it's a big investment for the factory
Yes.
to support those people. But you would like to continue, if at all possible.
Yeah. If it is possible, I would like to continue.
Yeah. I'm also very curious to know, like you mentioned briefly, the success of Margaret's work in terms of distribution and a commercial aspect. When Janet went to Wagwangzibo, it was basically a prestige event of producing
very quickly became that.
the set.
Yes.
When I go there, it's basically for experimental purposes. I'm not very interested in producing quantities of this ware, and I'm not interested in any way to commercialize it or distribute it as well. While Margaret and Ilona have more of a distribution commercial intent.
Yeah.
How has that been received according to your limited experience, because it is quite recent?
Yeah. The two projects in Zibo and in Gaochun are very different from each other. The project in Zibo is much more driven by research purpose, and both the factory and artist, they got agreement with each other. This project was driven by research purpose, while in Gaochun, it is quite different, and the purpose was driven by economic,
Creating product.
yes,
Creating
creating
product.
product. So we try to make designs for Chinese markets, but I don't think we can really understand the market. And I think for artists and designer, it is not their purpose to make design for the market. Yes, and also it is not always the best design can have the top market. Like Janet mentioned the British rose. It was very popular in 19th century and also in 20th century. It was the highest selling, I think. Yeah, people like to buy it, but I cannot see the reason. I mean, it is popular, but it is not really fantastic design. I mean, so...
Except when Janet uses it.
Yeah, but it's transformed from tradition to contemporary. That's her explanation for the British design. Is that right?
No, it's using it in a way that is different to the way in which it was intended
Yeah.
to be used.
So this panel will probably be ending sometime soon. Maybe somebody in the audience has a question as well or a remark to make. And there is a microphone in the middle of the room. And I see that I can't even think of your name right now. Can you believe this?
Canadian.
Yes, I know.
It'll come to you.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Linda Sikora.
Of course.
Thank you so much for this panel. It was fantastic and insightful. And I have a relationship with China in a personal context through my family, but also professional, but only through education. And I teach at Alfred, and we have a program in Beijing.
Yeah.
And it's an exchange program. And so we were very clear when we set up the program that it was for the students and for educational purposes. And it's really to educate the Chinese, new young Chinese designers. It's based in design and tableware. We do have an exchange with them. So American students go to Beijing, and of course the students from Beijing come to Alfred as well. So that's going on, and I've been there a couple times, and there's partnerships with one factory in particular. And what you're talking about now, this relationship between the two countries, the cultural exchange, the economic exchange based on ideas or concept or ideas of material culture and object making, is getting close to some part of what I felt when I first went there to see the program, which was this mix of being so excited by all of what was going on in China, visiting the factories, seeing those rows of pots, et cetera, and a tremendous internal conflict about being there and working and how it really worked both ways. So that, you're speaking to that in this panel. I appreciate that you're doing that in terms of like, what are we giving as not only just what do we get when we go there as artists to use this skill set, but what are we giving? And you're talking around the edges of that a bit, and I think it's a complex, and paradoxical. But I appreciate that. And if there's anything else you could offer about, what is being given, what do we give, or how it advances, both cultures. Do you know what I'm getting at? I haven't really tried to articulate myself, but one of the factories we're partnering with, we were very interested in that factory because it was smaller, because they really, even though there was no ventilation in some of the rooms that needed it, they treated their workers quite well. There was a real honoring of the skill sets that they had when we went there. So I'm just very conscious about how we enter exchange and what is given as well as what is received.
Yes, I will speak a bit to this, and I'm sure Janet may have something to add as well. I had been going to Jindajian, working in that city collaboratively using the extraordinary resources of the place. And I got quite used to navigate, the cultural sensibilities and differences. In Jindajian, it's quite different in the sense if you want a mold made, you find a mold maker and you negotiate a price and you pay for the service. And it's quite fair, I believe, on both sides and so on. But you're basically hiring people to do work for you. And that's a type of commercial exchange that also has its difficulties and problems and can be quite controversial. But if you decide to go to China, you have to live with the consequences of that situation. In the Chinese factory, it's quite different because we are guests, we are invited, and all the services are provided for free with tremendous generosity. You can't be too demanding. You can't say, well, I want 300 of those things to be done, because that's not what they provide for you, and that's not why you're there. But at the same time, the generosity is phenomenal and real. One thing that we do in terms of giving back is that we leave products behind as samples that are on exhibits in their showroom, and they use that work for their own prestige needs of promoting the factory as an enlightened place that invites foreign artists and designers who produce maybe a bit weird stuff that shows, open-mindedness and creativity and so on. And I think we have been used successfully in that sense. Like when the factory has a trade show, they bring those products to introduce to their clientele for those purposes. And that's a way where there is a give and take that's reasonably fair on both sides. Would you have anything to add to this, Janet?
I think that's unquestionably the case, that the primary role, I think it's changed over the course since we were first there, when Yanze and I were there, because it was making a product, this tea set, and it was a bit of a trial for it. But I think that it very quickly changed to one of a kind of a cultural exchange and also an enhancement of the factory's reputation by having a relationship with Western artists. And we're, I think, all happy to be used. I'm careful who I invite, because I don't want people who will come there and will abuse the hospitality, and what they want to do is to get product and take it out. They can do that, and you can have product made, but that's not the prime purpose of it. For example, when I did the tea set with Jiang, the collaborative tea set, or coffee set as they called it, there was no contract that I entered into about royalties that were payable, but it was going to be marketed and sold. The previous one also was marketed and sold, but they said the royalties were so low it would be too embarrassing to pay me. But I got quite a number of teapots. I could nominate how many teapots I wanted. And with the set that we did with Jiang, and it was released as a limited edition with a lot of fanfare, it must have made quite good money, quite good return for them. Because I think it almost all sold. There were 250 sets made, and they were selling for the equivalent of about $4,400 a set. So it's quite a lot of return. And at the time when they had this this success, it was actually on that day, wasn't it? It was the day of the launch. In the evening, Yanze came with the management to my room with the designer and the financial manager, and she said that they want to give me a gift, an acknowledgement of my part in that. I never felt taken advantage of in that process because I found the whole process so interesting. And as Paul said, it's research-driven there, or Yanze has also said it's research-driven. And I got handed a big wad of yuan, which I had to count. And it was a very generous design fee. But that wasn't a thing that had been negotiated in advance. So I think it's a little bit like was being spoken about at the talk last night. Trust. You know, there has to be a degree of trust when you're entering into those cultural exchanges. And so we actually do give designs. I think that the handles in the factory, I mean, He Yan had always been an excellent handle maker, but I think they've changed since I've been there and making handles. And they are handles that are more modern, perhaps, you know, work better for the contemporary market. So, you know, that's something that happens subtly. You know, a Waratah flower gets transferred into a decal, which gives it a slightly exotic look. It's kind of Qing, but not Qing. So I think there's all of those things that happen, and you can't be precious about copyright. I think that kind of thing, and I've seen some terrible examples of people getting precious about ownership of ideas, which are probably not 100% theirs anyway. I think it's best summed up by something that Marek Sekula said at a conference when someone was speaking to him about, you know, well, what do you do? This is after a lot of talk on the panel about, you know, the legal costs of defending copyright, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he was asked, well, what do you do when someone steals one of your designs? Because so many have been stolen. And he said, well, you know, when somebody takes one of my designs and it is, you know, taken and stolen, I have a new idea. You know, it's, I think we have to be much less precious about that ownership of things because we all stand on others' shoulders. Yeah.
There's also the effect of time to consider in the sense that what happens, you know, from my own personal experience happens very, very slowly. And it felt, you know, the influence that I receive from my presence there and how it affects my work is something that filters in at a very, very slow rate. And it may be the same thing in the other direction as well.
Yes.
You know, like it may not have had any impact at this point that I can notice, but somehow it may do so, and it may take time as well, in the sense that, you know, it may open up a possibility.
Yeah, and also when the factory management, I mean, it's quite an interesting management because the general manager of the factory, he was a musician, a composer, you know, so he's a cultured man, and his wife is a film star, dancer, and they also support the Australia-China Film Festival now. And so when they come to Australia, you know, I meet them, and also I'm happy to look after and host as well. So that starts to have reciprocity. Yeah. And I would look after any of their workers or, you know, their children, you know, come and study in Australia. You know, you do that because it develops to be more than just a business relationship. Yeah.
Yes,
Quick one.
there's a question. Please.
Hi, I would like to try, Mireille Perron, I would like to try an idea of why those objects are interesting and see if you think that that works. Thank you very much. It's because I do find those objects interesting, so therefore I have to tell myself what in those objects is interesting. And I think that across the three presentation, I would say that if they do something as a production that is different, is because they reintroduce mobility of object in a conscious manner. Mm-hmm. The distribution of authorship, the distribution of workmanship is understood as a way that we need to deal, that could be a possible model for understanding consciously the mobility again of those objects. When we think of it, and ceramic therefore is a very good way of thinking more consciously of the mobility of object. China, without you going there, is presented in the Western world as object coming out of the holodeck, where we have lost means of production. There's something strange there. So the distributed workmanship and authorship reintroduce that those objects are more conscious. They are conscious of the mobility, they are conscious of the authorship, and this is how previous object through, in my mind, when we think like why was it produced in England and then it got displaced to China, we understand that those were also the mobility of a more colonial pattern. So now what other pattern do we have that will justify the mobility of our object are crucial to the reason why we will or not produce other objects. So from that point of view, I think that they are really critical objects at that level. And there's something about mobility. The conscious mobility is what those objects represent in my mind.
Well, you know, you bring to such an opportunity a lot of your previous experiences. You know, like my work has always trying to honor whatever context in which it was made. You know, so when Janet invited me to go to work in a factory, I wanted it to be clearly a factory-made objects that honored the processes and technique of that context. And it's the same thing with digital technology. You know, like I'm really trying to maximize the potential of digital technology while knowing very little about how it's actually done. But in all of the work I've ever done, you know, I'm interested in how the object is experienced by other people as well. And as is the case with Janet possibly in a different way, but you've always been very concerned with how people use your objects and what kind of impact it has on their life and so on, and how this experience of that object changes the object and changes them and so on. And those were all intentions that I kept throughout that experiment as well, where I was trying to say, okay, I'm going to make a plate, but it's a plate you experience differently. And instead of experiencing the decoration when it's in use, you experience the decoration when it's not in use, when it's static and as a stacked, and how that modifies how you relate to those objects and so on. And it's interesting to do it in an aesthetic that's not your aesthetic, because once something becomes industrialized, it's removed from your sensibility, and you know, so many things become reduced in ways that are very, very interesting. So, yeah, your analysis was, as always, Mireille, very pertinent and clear, and thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's a very important aspect of that experience as a whole. Yeah, I'm guessing we're running out of time.
I think we're, yep.
So we welcome to continue these conversations with all of you during the coming few days. If you have more questions or comments to make, we would greatly welcome them. Thank you for being here.